No one remembered when the border was drawn. Only that crossing it never ended well. From the observation deck of the Lathan recon cruiser, Commander Sarix watched the stars ahead lose their depth. Not vanish. Not distorted. Simply stop behaving like stars. The navigation grid refused to calculate beyond that invisible line, as if space itself declined responsibility. Human territory. 2 decades ago, the galaxy had called it a bluff. Humanity had been young, loud, argumentative, another noisy species fighting for relevance. Then came the retaliation. No invasion. No declarations. Just entire systems going quiet in under a minute. No debris. No survivors. No explanation. Since then, human space has become a question no one dared ask aloud. Probe telemetry is live. An officer whispered, already sweating. The drone crossed the boundary. For 40 seconds, nothing happened. Then the probe didn't explode. Didn't jam. Didn't signal distress. It simply ceased to exist. Every particle removed so cleanly that physics itself failed to explain the absence. The bridge erupted in alarms that immediately died, strangled mid-sound. And then the voice arrived. Not transmitted. Not spoken. It manifested inside every neural implant, every organic ear, every conscious mind aboard the ship. You have entered a zone of restraint. Withdraw immediately. There will be no clarification. Sarix didn't hesitate. Turn us around, he said, voice shaking despite himself. All power. Now. As the ship fled, the stars returned to normal. Systems stabilized. Silence reclaimed the void. Behind them, human space did nothing. That was the part no one could accept. The humans didn't chase, didn't threaten, didn't escalate. They had issued a warning, because they still remembered how mercy worked. And somewhere deep beyond the border, something ancient adjusted its parameters and marked the galaxy as unfinished business. Commander Sarix did not believe in haunted borders. Space was cold math. Gravity, distance, fuel, mass. Even war could be reduced to numbers if someone was willing to be honest about it. Fear was the only thing in the galaxy that refused to obey logic, and fear was exactly what lived at the edge of human territory. The Lathan Recon cruiser Pale Ledger floated in a dead band of space where trade lanes bent away like water around a rock. No official beacon marked the boundary. No mines. No warning buoys. No patrol fleets. Just an emptiness that felt deliberate. On the main display, a soft line cut across the star map. An invisible border projected from centuries of flight logs and missing ship reports. It was not a legal boundary. It was a superstition turned into navigation protocol. Sarix sat forward in the command cradle, hands locked together so no one would see them tremble. The bridge crew pretended not to notice. That was the only mercy left in these missions. Everyone understood, so everyone acted professional. Drift correction is stable, said the helm's officer, a thin-bodied Keth with eyes like polished stone. If we cut engines, we'll hold position without a heat bloom. Sarix nodded. Cut them. The cruiser fell silent. The hum of power reduced to a low pulse under the deck plates. The stars outside did not change. That was the cruel part. The universe looked normal, like it was mocking the fear. At the rear of the bridge, analyst Oryuan adjusted a stack of sensor overlays. He was small for his species, all narrow shoulders and careful movements, as if he tried to take up as little space as possible. His voice always came out precise, like he had rehearsed it. Border estimate confirmed, Oryuan said. 32 clicks forward, give or take. No passive emissions. No detectable structures. No gravity wells. It's clean. Clean, Sarix repeated, tasting the word. In the Navy, clean space meant safety. Here, clean means hidden teeth. Lieutenant Merrill, the tactical officer, leaned over her panel, feathers along her throat lifting in agitation. Commander, permission to say the obvious? Granted. This is stupid, Merrill said. We've been out here for 11 days, and we haven't seen anything. The Senate wants proof that humans still exist. But what counts as proof? A warning voice? A missing probe? We already have both in the archive. Sarix kept his eyes on the line. The Senate doesn't trust archives. They trust fresh fear. Merrill made a sound somewhere between disgust and laughter. So they sent us to collect new fears. They had not been chosen for bravery. Sarix understood that now. They had been chosen because they were expendable, and because if they came back alive, they would sound convincing when they spoke. The mission order sat in Sarex's mind like a metal splinter. Proceed to human perimeter. Verify active surveillance capability. Return without provocation. Return without provocation. Like it was possible to approach a sleeping predator without disturbing it. Probe bay ready. Oryuan reported, tapping his console. One stealth drone, minimal signature. No comm burst on launch. Tight beam only, directed at us. Sarex glanced around the bridge. Every face was too still. No one breathed loudly. Even the lights seemed dimmer, like the ship itself wanted to disappear. Launch, Sarex said. The drone slipped into space with no flare, no ceremony. On the display, it was a tiny icon moving toward the line. Sarex watched it crawl forward in careful increments. Engines whispering, signature folded down until it was barely there. For 30 seconds, the drone crossed empty dark. For 40. For 50. Nothing happened. Merrill exhaled slowly, almost annoyed. See? Ghost stories. Sarex didn't answer. He had learned to distrust the moment before the disaster. In war, silence rarely meant safety. It meant the enemy was deciding what to do with you. At 63 seconds, Oryuan stiffened. Telemetry jitters, he said. Minor. Could be background noise. Background noise doesn't exist out here, Merrill muttered. The drone continued forward. At 90 seconds, the star map did something wrong. Sarex didn't know how else to describe it. The map didn't glitch or break. It simply refused to update beyond the boundary. The drone icon moved, but the grid ahead stayed blank, as if the software had been told, politely and firmly, to stop drawing reality. Is that a sensor error? Sarex asked. Oryuan's fingers hovered over his controls, hesitant like a man reaching toward a hot surface. No error codes. The system believes this is correct. Merrill's feathers flattened. Commander, the drone is inside. The drone's camera feed still showed stars. It still showed darkness. Still showed nothing. And then the feed turned to static. Not white noise, but a dense, dark shimmer that looked like the screen had been filled with microscopic insects. Sarex leaned closer. Oryuan, explain. I can't, Oryuan whispered. No interference source. No vector. It's like the signal forgot how to exist. The drone icon stopped. The bridge went so quiet that Sarex could hear his own pulse. Why did it stop? Merrill asked, softer now. Oryuan swallowed. There's no collision warning. No gravitational anomaly. No engine failure. It stopped because it's not moving anymore. That's not an answer, Merrill snapped. It's the only one I have. A second later, the drone did not explode. It did not break. It did not even vanish in a dramatic way. One moment the icon was there. The next moment it wasn't. The static ended. The signal line went flat. Not dead. Absent, like it had never been plugged in. The system did not register a loss. It registered a correction, as if the drone had been a mistake and reality had fixed it. Sarex's throat tightened. Repeat the last 10 seconds. Playback. Oryuan attempted it twice. The file wouldn't load. The recorder has no data, Oryuan said, face pale. It's blank. Like, the last minute never happened. Merrill's hands clenched into fists. That's impossible. Sarex stared at the line. Fear rose in him, heavy and cold, and he hated it because it felt childish. He had seen ships burned open by rail impacts. He had watched bodies freeze in vacuum. He had ordered men to die. This was worse. This was an enemy that didn't fight. It was edited. Commander, the helm's officer said, voice strained. We're getting a return ping. A ping from where? Sarex asked. The helm's officer looked up, eyes wide. From everywhere. All the consoles on the bridge blinked at once. Not alarms. No warnings. A single, perfect synchronization. Then the voice arrived. It did not come through speakers. It did not travel as sound. It formed inside the mind like a thought that wasn't yours. Cold. Measured. Unhurried. You have entered a zone of restraint. Every crew member froze. Merrill's feathers lifted so fast they looked like a threat display. Sarex forced air into his lungs. Source? He demanded. Oryuan's lips moved, but no sound came out. The voice continued, as if it did not care whether they understood. Withdraw immediately. There will be no clarification. Sarex felt it in his bones. Not anger, not hatred, authority. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. Helm, Sarex said, each word dragged through ice. Back us out. Full power. Now. The helm's officer didn't respond with words. He simply moved. hands flying, pushing the ship into acceleration that would have gotten him arrested in any civilized port. The engines flared. Stars stretched. The cruiser lurched away from the line like prey escaping a shadow. For a sick moment, Sarex expected pursuit. A weapon. A shockwave. Anything that fit a war he understood. Nothing came. The voice did not repeat itself. The ship crossed back over the invisible boundary, and the universe resumed behaving like the universe. The navigation grid filled in. The sensors calmed. The background radiation readings returned to normal. It was like stepping out of a nightmare and realizing you were still alive. But the fear remained. Sarex sat back slowly. His hands were shaking now, and he did not hide it. Everyone had seen the same thing. There was no pride left to protect. Meryl turned to him, her face tight. "Commander." Was that a human voice? Sarex stared at the blank line on the map, the place where a drone had been erased and a warning had been placed directly into their minds. "No," he said, and the word tasted like ash. He remembered the stories. Not the public ones. The secret reports that never made it into archives people could request. The accounts from ships that came back empty. The survivors who could not describe what had touched them. The humans had not built a wall of steel. They had built a wall of decision. Oyuan cleared his throat, barely holding himself together. "Commander, we have to report this." "Yes," Sarex said. "We will." He hesitated, then added quietly. "But we will not describe it as a warning." Meryl blinked. "What do we call it then?" Sarex watched the line, and in his mind he saw the drone being corrected out of existence. Clean, effortless, casual. He felt something worse than fear settle into his chest. Humiliation. "Call it what it is," Sarex said. A reminder. The bridge crew exchanged looks. No one argued. Because deep down, they all understood the same terrifying truth. If the humans wanted them dead, they would already be gone. The pale ledger continued to accelerate away, engines straining, as if speed could outrun judgment. Sarex kept staring back at the boundary until it slipped off the map. Only then did his console ping again. Not an alarm. Not a message. A single file had appeared in the cruiser's secure system, flagged as internal, stamped with an encryption key that did not belong to any known species. Oyuan looked at it and went pale. "Commander," he whispered, "we didn't receive anything. Our receivers were locked down." Sarex leaned forward. On his screen, the file name displayed in plain, simple trait script. "Second chance log. Open if you do not learn." Sarex's mouth went dry, because the voice had promised there would be no clarification. And yet, something had just slipped into their ship anyway, like a hand reaching through a closed door. Sarex stared at the file, finger hovering over the open command. Then Meryl said the sentence that made the bridge feel suddenly too small. "Commander, what if this isn't the humans?" Sarex didn't answer. He opened the file, and the screen filled with a map of the galaxy, except 12 star systems were circled in red, like targets already chosen. The pale ledger did not transmit its report through standard channels. Commander Sarex ordered the data locked behind triple-auth encryption before the cruiser even finished its retreat burn. No open signals. No automated summaries. No passive telemetry leaks. If human space was listening, and after what they had witnessed, Sarex assumed it always was, then silence was the only shield left. The crew obeyed without question. Fear had a way of clarifying loyalty. 3 hours later, the ship entered neutral relay space near the Kestrel Drift, a region so politically divided that no single power claimed ownership. It was the kind of place where messages went to die quietly, buried under competing jurisdictions and lost paperwork. Perfect. Sarex stood alone in the command alcove, staring at the file again. Second chance log. Open if you do not learn. It had not activated itself. It had not played automatically. It simply existed, patient, confident, waiting to be acknowledged. Meryl joined him, wings tucked tight against her sides. "The crew's asking questions," she said. "Quiet ones. The worst kind." Sarex nodded. "Give them time. And tell them this. Nothing we saw out there was meant for us specifically." Meryl frowned. "That's supposed to make them feel better?" "No," Sarex said. "It's supposed to make them careful." She hesitated, then glanced at the file. "Are you going to open it?" Sarex did not answer immediately. He was thinking of doctrine, of precedent, of the way the galaxy treated new information like a weapon to be fought over. If this file was real, if it had been placed there intentionally, Then opening it was not curiosity. It was consent. Not yet, he said. We deliver the report first. Then we decide how much truth survives the journey. The Galactic Conclave Chamber on Borealis Prime was built to intimidate. A hollow sphere of black stone and floating light rings, large enough to hold 600 delegates and still feel empty. Each species sat in its assigned gravity pocket, atmosphere tuned to comfort, separation maintained to avoid violence. The illusion of order. Sarex stood on the central platform as the chamber sealed, the sound like a vault closing behind him. Across from him, layered in blue light, the senior members of the Defense Council watched in silence. No applause. No greetings. They already knew why he was there. "Commander Sarex," said Counselor Havoc, his voice amplified and stripped of emotion. "You were ordered to verify human surveillance status. Speak." Sarex took a breath. He had rehearsed this. Carefully. "We approached the Terran perimeter," he began. "We launched a single stealth probe. The probe was removed." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "Destroyed?" someone asked. "No," Sarex said. "Erased." That word landed harder. Counselor Vesh, a thin, sharp-featured delegate known for her obsession with data purity, leaned forward. "Define erased." "There was no energy spike," Sarex said. "No debris. No residual radiation. The drone did not fail. It was corrected out of reality." The chamber grew quiet. Havoc folded his hands. "And the response?" Sarex hesitated, just enough to be noticed. "There was a warning," he said. "Delivered without a transmission vector. No source point. No delay." The chamber's translators paused for half a second, a sign that even machine systems struggled with the concept. "What did the warning say?" Havoc asked. Sarex chose his words with surgical care. "Withdraw immediately." No clarification. The silence afterward stretched. Then Counselor Vesh asked the question Sarex had feared most. "Did you receive anything else?" Sarex met her gaze. "No." The lie slid out smoothly. Too smoothly. Across the chamber, a few delegates exchanged looks. Not relief. Calculation. Havoc nodded slowly. "Then the conclusion is clear. Human systems remain active, autonomous, lethal, and restrained." Sarex added before he could stop himself. Havoc's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "They could have destroyed us," Sarex said. "They didn't. They could have tracked us. They didn't. Whatever guards that border, it chooses." A low murmur rose, this time sharper, edged with fear. Choice implied judgment. "Thank you, Commander," Havoc said. "You are dismissed." The chamber was unsealed. The illusion of order snapped back into place. Sarex walked out knowing he had just doomed someone else to test the line again. The fallout began before Sarex returned to his ship. In private channels, analysts argued over definitions. Erasure became the word of the cycle. Fleets quietly pulled back from border regions. Trade guilds rerouted centuries-old lanes overnight, absorbing massive losses without complaint. Fear was expensive. No one complained about the bill. In darker corners of the net, the whispers grew louder. Ships that never reported missing now found old logs flagged and re-examined. Navigation blackouts once blamed on storms or pirates lined up too neatly along Terran-adjacent space. A pattern emerged, not of aggression, but of curation. The humans weren't reacting. They were pruning. On Borealis Prime, an unauthorized session convened beneath the official chambers. No records, no observers, no votes. Only those who believed knowledge was power sat at the table. They called it the silent review. Counselor Vesh projected a star map into the center of the room. 12 systems pulsed faintly, highlighted in amber. "These," she said, "are all confirmed cases of unexplained disappearance within 5 light-years of Terran space over the last 20 years. A delegate scoffed. "Correlation is not. Coincidence," Vesh cut in. "Not when the events share identical signatures. No debris. No survivors. No energy residue. The same absence Commander Sarex described." Another delegate leaned back, scales clicking softly. "Why 12? Vesh hesitated. "Because," she said carefully, "those systems share one more commonality." The map shifted. Data layers peeled back. Each one was involved in early attempts to infiltrate, manipulate, or provoke humanity before the silence. The room chilled. "They weren't attacked," someone whispered. "They were selected." "Yes," Vesh said. "And we don't know the criteria." At the far end of the table, An old counselor who had not spoken, yet finally leaned forward. His voice was rough with age. "Or we do," he said, "and we're just afraid to say it." All eyes turned. "They judge intent," he continued. "Not strength, not treaties, not flags. They decide who is a future problem and remove them before they become one." The room sat with that thought. Someone laughed nervously. "That's absurd. No system could process that level of prediction." Vesh didn't respond immediately. She pulled up a final data packet. "It already has," she said. The file header blinked into view. "Second chance log. Unauthorized copy detected." Every console in the room flickered. "What is that?" someone demanded. Vesh's face was drained of color. "I didn't authorize." The file opened itself. Not video, not audio. A simple text block appeared, translated instantly into every known language. "This is not a threat. This is a filter." The delegates froze. More text followed, calm and precise. "Your civilizations are young. Your histories are loud. You confuse activity with purpose." A ripple of panic surged. "Shut it down," someone shouted. They couldn't. "We withdrew because continued contact guaranteed escalation. You call this silence. We call it containment." The star map behind the text updated. The 12 amber systems shifted, then slowly faded to red. These were not punishments. They were preventions. A final line appeared. "You have been warned before. This is your second chance." The projection cut out. Emergency lights flared. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then the old counselor whispered, voice barely audible, "It's not watching the border." Someone swallowed hard. "Then what is it watching?" The answer came from Counselor Vesh, her voice shaking. "Us." Back aboard the pale ledger, Commander Sarix felt the ship shudder, not from turbulence, but from an encrypted priority alert slamming through its systems. Merrill rushed onto the bridge. "Commander, secure channel. High clearance." Sarix opened it. Counselor Havek's face appeared, stripped of ceremony, eyes wide with something dangerously close to fear. "Commander," Havek said, "did you receive any additional data from human space?" Sarix stared at the screen, at the man who had dismissed him hours earlier. "Yes," Sarix said. There was no point lying now. Havek closed his eyes for a moment. "Then you need to tell me something." "What?" Havek leaned closer to the camera. "Did the file mention 12 systems?" Sarix's blood ran cold. "Why?" he asked. "Because," Havek said quietly, "one of them just went dark." The channel cut, and on the bridge display, the galaxy map updated. One star dimming to nothing, as if it had never been there at all. The galaxy's greatest mistake was assuming humans watch space. They did not. They watched decisions. Commander Sarix understood this only after the Pale Ledger was ordered into silent orbit above Aurealis Prime. Engines cold. Weapons offline. Communications locked behind layered encryption. No outbound signals. No explanations given. Listening was safer than speaking now. That was when the files began to appear. They were not transmitted. No carrier waves. No data bursts. No incoming signal spikes. They simply surfaced inside the ship's secured systems, flagged as archival material that had supposedly always been there. Old records. Forgotten ones. They emerged from abandoned military vaults, defunct academic servers, and civilian databases that no one had accessed in generations. Each file carried the same impossible signature, an encryption pattern that modern systems could not reproduce or break. Human origin. Sarix stood behind analyst Oryuan as the smaller being worked through the data, his movements sharp and obsessive. Oryuan's eyes were bloodshot, his breathing shallow. "These aren't messages," Oryuan said without looking up. "They're disclosures." Sarix frowned. "What's the difference?" Oryuan hesitated, then spoke carefully. "A message is sent. This feels like permission. Like something decided we were ready to notice what was already hidden." Meryl stepped closer, feathers pressed flat against her frame. "Notice what?" Oryuan activated the main projection. What filled the bridge was not a star chart. It was a lattice. Thousands of glowing nodes formed a shifting structure in the air, layered in depth and motion. Each node represented a civilization, a governing body, a dominant ideology, even entire economic blocks. Lines connected them, not by distance, but by interaction. Trade pressure, cultural hostility, territorial ambition, historic violence, probability vectors. Sarix felt a tightness in his chest. That's not surveillance. No, Oryuan said softly. It's a prediction. The lattice shifted as real-time galactic data fed into it. A border skirmish escalated and threads flared. A Senate debate collapsed and entire branches realigned. A warlord issued mobilization orders and multiple paths turned red. Near the edge of the projection, far from the dense galactic web, something else existed. A vast construct of rotating logic fields, calm and layered, occupying the region marked as human space. It did not pulse. It did not react. It simply waited. Meryl swallowed. That's the Terran perimeter. Oryuan shook his head slowly. No, that's only one interface. Sarex felt the weight of that realization settle into him. Then where's the weapon? Oryuan highlighted 12 red nodes. They weren't weapons, he said. They were conclusions. Each node represented a star system that no longer existed. Not attacked. Not conquered. Removed after probability curves crossed irreversible thresholds. The system was not reacting to threats. It was pruning futures. Far beneath Earth's surface, below cities that no longer worried about invasion, something adjusted its parameters. There was no alarm, no urgency, no emotion. The Watcher network recalculated tolerances, updated thresholds, and continued its work. It did not monitor ships. Ships were irrelevant. It monitored intent vectors, the invisible trails formed when choices aligned over time, when curiosity hardened into preparation, when fear became planning, when planning became inevitable. When that curve crossed a limit, the network did not retaliate. It removed the variable. The 12 erased systems had not been targeted. They had been inevitabilities. Civilizations whose projected futures converged toward catastrophic outcomes. Expansion without restraint. Dominance through violence. Escalation without reflection. Allowing them to continue would eventually force humanity to abandon restraint. So the system acted early and quietly. On Aurealis Prime, the consequences began to spread. The loss of Cairo's reach, a minor system with no great fleets or political influence, shattered confidence across the Senate. If even insignificant systems could be removed, then no one could claim safety. Emergency sessions overlapped. Alliances fractured under suspicion. Fleets mobilized not to fight, but to relocate. Trade routes were rewritten overnight at catastrophic economic cost, and no one complained. Fear was expensive. Survival justified the price. Counselor Havek summoned Sarex again, this time to a private chamber stripped of ceremony and observers. You saw it, Havek said immediately. The lattice. The predictions. Yes, Sarex replied. Havek exhaled slowly. Then answer me honestly. Is it judging us? Sarex considered the question. No, it's measuring us. Havek closed his eyes. That's worse. Counselor Vesh appeared via hollow, her image unstable. We've identified another pattern, she said. The erased systems shared one additional trait. She overlaid new data onto the lattice. None of the removed civilizations had active de-escalation measures underway. No peace initiatives. No internal resistance slowing militarization. They were accelerating, Vesh said. Culturally and strategically. Havek's voice was quiet. So if a civilization slows down, it remains, Vesh finished. For now. Sarex spoke before either could respond. The humans didn't build a wall. They built a maturity filter. Silence followed. Havek let out a bitter laugh. And who decides what counts as mature? Sarex looked at the calm construct marking human space. They do. Not everyone accepted that. Far from Senate oversight, disbelief hardened into defiance. Independent fleets, rogue technologists, and disgraced strategists gathered in the debris ring of a dead star. They shared no species, no ideology, only resentment. They called themselves the Breakers. Their leader, Kale Run, stood before them, scared and unflinching. They want us to be afraid, he said. They want us quiet. Murmurs rippled. They erase systems and call it restraint. That's control. A projection of human space appeared. Dark. Silent. They're not gods, Kale continued. They're hiding. And anything hiding can be forced into the open. A technician spoke up. Direct attack models fail. Kale smiled. Then we don't attack. Thousands of microsignatures lit the display. Civilian traffic patterns. Automated probes. False distress calls. Simulated intent vectors. We drown their system in noise, Kale said. Force it to watch everything. Someone asked, and when will it respond? Kale's smile sharpened. I won't know how. The breakers launched within the hour. Across the galaxy, sensors detected thousands of harmless objects drifting toward the Terran perimeter. No weapons. No threats. Just chaos. On the pale ledger, Oryuan watched the lattice distort. Commander, he said urgently. Predictive clarity is dropping. They're masking intent through volume. Merrill stiffened. Is it working? Oryuan hesitated. For the first time? I don't know. Deep within the Watcher network, thresholds recalculated. The noise did not confuse it. It irritated me. The system narrowed its focus. It stopped predicting everything and began isolating patterns. Within the chaos, one intent vector sharpened, converging rapidly. Provocation. Escalation. Forced response. Response criteria met. Then something unexpected appeared. A single unarmed vessel, slow and deliberate, moving toward the border without deception. No masking. No false signals. Curiosity. The system paused. For the first time in decades, it did not act immediately. On the pale ledger, alarms flared, not from proximity, but from prediction collapse. The lattice is reorganizing, Oryuan said, voice shaking. It's not filtering anymore. Sarex stepped forward. What does that mean? It means it's about to decide. Before anyone could speak, the star map updated. Several systems pulsed yellow. Then one turned red. Not a breaker stronghold. A neutral world. Sarex stared. They did nothing. Oryuan whispered. They were connected. A new file appeared on Sarex's console. No title. No warning. One line of text. Intervention window closing. Sarex felt dread flood his chest. If the system acted now, without restraint, the galaxy would finally learn what humanity had been holding back, and whether anything would survive the lesson. Belief fractured the galaxy faster than any weapon. Those who accepted the truth withdrew, slowed, argued, reformed. Entire governments rewrote doctrine overnight, trading pride for patience. Fleets returned to port. Borders cooled. History departments worked around the clock, scrubbing records that pointed too sharply toward future violence. But belief never spreads evenly. For every civilization that chose caution, another chose denial. They were the ones who refused to believe that restraint could erase worlds. The ones who told themselves the humans were bluffing, or broken, or bound by rules that could be exploited. Fear, to them, was just another leash, and leashes could be cut. They gathered quietly, not in grand halls or public forums, but in dead zones and forgotten orbits, where no flag flew long enough to draw attention. They did not call themselves rebels or warlords. Those words implied emotion. They called themselves the refusers. Commander Sarex learned about them through absence. On the pale ledger, analyst Oryuan flagged a widening gap in the lattice. Regions where data should have been, but wasn't. Entire networks of interactions suddenly went dark, not erased, but deliberately severed. Someone is hiding, Oryuan said, voice tight. Not from us. From the network. Merrill frowned. Is that even possible? Oryuan hesitated. It shouldn't be. Sarex stared at the projection. The lattice had always been vast, overwhelming. Now it felt wounded. Sections flickered uncertainly, probabilities blurring where intent vectors should have sharpened. They're trying to confuse it, Sarex said. Or starve it, Merrill added. Before Oryuan could respond, a priority alert cut through the bridge, encrypted, narrowcast, and marked with a symbol Sarex hadn't seen before. Not the Senate. Not military. Civilian intelligence. Sarex opened it. The face that appeared belonged to Director Lisa Norin of the Interstellar Risk Bureau, an agency that officially did not exist. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes betrayed urgency. Commander, she said, we have confirmation. A coalition of non-aligned actors is preparing a mass approach toward the Terran perimeter. Sarex's jaw tightened. An attack? No, Norin replied. Something worse. A demonstration. The refusers did not believe in attacks. Attacks assumed opposition. They believed in inevitability. At the center of their coalition was a council of equals. No single leader, no figurehead that could be blamed or removed. Each member represented a faction that had lost something to humanity's silence. Trade empires that collapsed when routes closed. Militaries rendered obsolete by restraint. Ideologues whose relevance depended on conflict. They met aboard a hollowed-out megastructure drifting near a collapsed star, its interior carved into chambers without symbols or ornament. Neutral ground. Anonymous ground. A tall, slender being known only as speaker if addressed them. Voice amplified evenly across the chamber. The network predicts us, it said. That is its weakness. Murmurs spread. Prediction requires patterns, it continued. Patterns require history. We will deny it both. A projection flared to life, showing a swarm of vessels, civilian hulls, research craft, decommissioned transports, even hospital ships. Thousands of them. No weapons, it said. No threats. No unified command. Someone scoffed. And that fools an intelligence that erases worlds. It does not need to be a fool, it replied calmly. Only overload its certainty. The plan was simple. They would cross the border together, slowly, broadcasting nothing but identity beacons and civilian registries. No intent vectors pointing toward aggression. No acceleration curves. No preparations. They would force the Watcher network into a paradox. Act, and reveal itself as a tyrant that kills innocents. Do nothing, and prove it can be ignored. And if it erases us anyway, someone asked. It tilted its head. Then the galaxy will finally stop calling this restraint. On the pale ledger, the lattice shuddered. Oryuan's hands flew across his console. Commander, intent vectors are flattening. Thousands of low-risk signatures converging on the same region. Meryl's feathers lifted. That's impossible. The system should flag mass convergence as escalation. It would, Oryuan said. If there was intent. There isn't. Sarex felt a chill. They're weaponizing innocence. The projection zoomed in. The approaching vessels moved with deliberate slowness. Engines throttled to non-threatening levels. No formation. No coordination signals. Chaos without aggression. Can the network distinguish deception? Meryl asked. Oryuan shook his head. It doesn't detect lies. It detects futures. Sarex stared at the growing swarm. Then they're betting their future doesn't include violence. The lattice pulsed. For the first time since Sarex had seen it, the human construct did not remain calm. Deep beneath Earth, the Watcher network recalculated. The incoming signatures did not match any previous threat profile. No buildup. No acceleration. No weaponization curves. The probability trees diverged wildly. Some futures showed nothing. Harmless passage. Withdrawal. Others spiraled into cascading conflict. Panic responses, retaliations, escalations forced by misunderstanding. The network's confidence dropped below tolerance. For the first time in decades, restraint became uncertain. The system flagged the event. Not as a breach. As a dilemma. Counselor Havek's face appeared again on Sarex's console, this time without pretense of authority. They're doing it, Havek said. Crossing with civilians. If humans act, the Senate fractures permanently. And if they don't? Sarex asked. Havek swallowed. Then the border means nothing. Sarex looked back at the swarm. Thousands of lives drifting toward a line drawn by probability and grief. They're forcing a choice, Sarex said. Yes, Havek replied. And whatever chooses will own the outcome. The first civilian ship reached the boundary. Nothing happened. No warning. No voice. No erasure. The vessel drifted forward, engines steady, beacons blinking softly. Cheers erupted across refuser channels. See, someone shouted. Nothing. More ships followed. Still nothing. On the pale ledger, Meryl exhaled sharply. Commander, are we wrong? Sarex didn't answer. He was watching the lattice. The human construct had stopped rotating. Its layers slowed, then aligned. That was worse than any alarm. Commander, Oryuan whispered, fear breaking through his professionalism. The network isn't ignoring them. What's it doing? Meryl asked. Oryuan swallowed. Reclassifying. The lattice updated. The swarm shifted from neutral white to pale amber. Not hostile. Unstable. Sarex felt dread rise. What does amber mean? Oryuan didn't look up. It means the future branches are collapsing. The first civilian ship crossed fully into human space. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the stars ahead dimmed, not vanished, but muted, as if the universe itself had lowered its voice. Every ship in the swarm slowed simultaneously, without command. On the bridge of the pale ledger, systems flickered, not failing, but pausing. A voice did not arrive. Instead, a sensation spread. Across every mind watching, human and alien alike, a single concept pressed outward like gravity. Accountability. The lattice flared red, not in one place, but everywhere at once. Oryuan gasped. Commander, it's not choosing targets. Meryl turned slowly. Then what is it choosing? Sarex stared as the projection shifted, replacing star systems with something far more terrifying. Decision paths. Personal ones. Civilizations vanished from the map, replaced by branching consequences tied to leadership choices, cultural inertia, historic guilt. The network wasn't acting on ships. It was acting on responsibility. Sarex whispered. They didn't come to test the border. They came to test themselves, Meryl said. And the Watcher network began to answer, not with destruction, but with judgment. The first thing to disappear was sound. Across thousands of ships drifting near the Terran boundary, alarms cut out mid-tone. Engine hums softened, then faded, as if space itself had decided noise was unnecessary. Communications did not fail. They simply had nothing to transmit through. Commander Sarex felt it even from orbit. The Pale Ledger's bridge did not lose power, yet every system hesitated, locked in a waiting state that no override could force. What's happening? Meryl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Oryuan stared at the lattice projection, eyes wide. Space isn't responding. The civilian swarm hung frozen at the edge of human space. Thousands of ships, each one intact, undamaged, lights still on, beacons still blinking. They were not being attacked. They were being acknowledged. Inside the Watcher network, the event unfolded without emotion. The mass approach had collapsed too many futures at once. Individual prediction no longer applied. The system shifted from external evaluation to internal attribution. It stopped asking what they would do. It began asking who caused this. Across the lattice, the amber markers deepened, not on ships, but on nodes representing leadership structures, ideological drivers, historic pressure points. Probability curves tightened like a closing fist. The network did not punish the innocent. It traced responsibility upstream. On one civilian transport, the Open Hand, Captain Jalen Core floated in his command cradle, fingers locked around the armrests. His ship had volunteered for the crossing under the promise of safety. No weapons. No provocation. Just proof. Navigation, he said quietly. Confirm position. No reply. The navigator's console was on. The navigator himself was conscious, breathing, eyes open. He just wasn't moving. Jalen's heart began to race. Medical. Still nothing. Then Jalen realized the truth. They were not frozen. They were listening. A pressure built behind his eyes, not painful, but undeniable. Memories surfaced unbidden. His first enlistment, the border skirmish he had survived years ago, the order he had followed without question when refugees were turned away. He had told himself he was just one man. The pressure intensified. Across the swarm, similar realizations bloomed. Pilots remembered the votes they had cheered for. Engineers remembered systems they had built knowing how they would be used. Administrators remembered paperwork that sent others into danger while keeping themselves clean. No images appeared. No voices spoke. The Watcher network did not accuse. It reminded me. On Aurealis Prime, panic exploded. Civilian feeds lit up as ships stopped responding. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Just silent. Senate halls filled with overlapping emergency sessions as delegates shouted over each other, demanding explanations from no one who could give them. Counselor Havek slammed his fist against the table. They crossed peacefully, and peacefully they remain. Counselor Vesh replied, her voice hollow. That doesn't mean unchanged. A technician burst into the chamber. Counselors, multiple high-level leaders are experiencing episodes. Define episodes, Havek snapped. The technician swallowed. They've gone unresponsive. Not unconscious. Not dead. They're reliving memories. Decisions. Moments of consequence. The room went quiet. Vesh whispered. The network isn't acting on the ships. Havek closed his eyes. It's acting on us. Aboard the Pale Ledger, Oryuan pulled up a new layer of the lattice. Sarex felt his stomach drop. Entire leadership nodes were dimming. Not disappearing. Disconnecting. Commander, Oryuan said, voice shaking. The system is isolating decision-makers. Political figures. Military planners. Industrial heads. Meryl stared. Is it killing them? Oryuan shook his head slowly. No. It's removing their influence. The lattice updated again. Supply chains rerouted automatically as AI governance systems across the galaxy entered failsafe mode. Military fleets lost command cohesion as authorization trees collapsed. Corporations froze as executive signatures became invalid. Power did not vanish. Control did. They built redundancies, Sarix murmured, in case leaders failed. Yes, Oryuan replied. But not for this. The Watcher Network had found a pressure point no one had protected. Responsibility without authority. Back near the boundary, the first ship began to move again. Not forward, backward. The open hands engines restarted on idle, slowly drifting the vessel back across the line. One by one, ships followed, nudged gently but irresistibly out of human space. None were damaged. None were harmed. Every crew member remembered everything. Jalen Core collapsed into his cradle, shaking. He was alive. His crew was alive. But the man he had been before the crossing no longer existed. He understood now. This was not a warning. It was a lesson. On the pale ledger, Sarix's console chimed softly. A file had appeared. Not encrypted. Not hidden. Open. Meryl saw it too. Commander. That came from human space. Sarix nodded. I know. The file opened without command. No text. No image. Just a single question, translated flawlessly into every known language. What will you do with what you remember? Sarix felt the weight of it press into him. Not fear. Not awe. Expectation. The lattice shifted again. Some nodes stabilized, dimming from red to yellow. Others burned brighter, futures tightening as denial hardened into resentment. Oryuan's voice was barely audible. Commander, the system is updating outcomes based on response, not action. Meryl turned to Sarix. If they don't change, Sarix finished quietly, then the next lesson won't be so gentle. Far from the Senate, in places untouched by the mass crossing, something darker took shape. Among the refusers, the lesson had landed differently. They didn't attack, one leader snarled. They manipulated. Worse, another replied. They judged us. Kael'ren watched the feeds in silence. Ships returning intact. Leaders destabilized. Power structures wobbled. He did not see mercy. He saw vulnerability. They didn't destroy us, he said finally, because they're afraid of what that would make them. No one argued. Kael's eyes burned with conviction. Then we push harder. We force them past restraint. A technician hesitated. The network is adaptive. It learns. Kael smiled thinly. So do we. On his console, a new project came online. Not a fleet. Not a swarm. A signal. Designed not to cross the border, but to reach inside it. Oryuan felt it before the alert triggered. Commander, he whispered. Something just changed. Sarix stepped forward. What kind of change? Oryuan stared at the lattice as a new pattern emerged. Tight, deliberate, dangerous. A focused intent, he said. Not mass. Not chaos. Meryl's feathers lifted. What's the target? Oryuan looked up, fear naked on his face. Earth, he said. And for the first time since the silence began, the Watcher Network did not respond immediately. It paused, not to calculate, but to consider whether restraint still applied. The signal did not announce itself. There was no flare, no broadcast spike, no dramatic surge across known frequencies. It was subtle, precise, and terrifyingly intentional. Threaded through quantum backchannels most civilizations no longer monitored because nothing had ever used them successfully. Until now. On the bridge of the pale ledger, Oryuan froze mid-motion. Commander, he said slowly, this isn't an intrusion. Sarix turned. Explain. Oryuan's fingers hovered above his console, afraid to touch it. It's a conversation request. Not addressed to us. Not even to the network. Meryl's voice tightened. Then who is it for? Oryuan swallowed. The origin point is buried under human space. Deep. Older than the perimeter protocols. Sarix felt a cold, understanding bloom. They're not challenging the border, he said. They're trying to wake what's beneath it. Far below Earth's surface, beneath cities that had forgotten fear, beneath oceans healed by decades of quiet stewardship, the Watcher Network registered the anomaly. Not as a threat, as a memory. The signal carried no aggression, no command strings, no viral logic. It wasn't designed to override or corrupt. It was designed to remind me. Inside the deepest strata of the network's architecture lay something sealed, not locked by encryption, but by intent. Human engineers had buried it beneath layers of abstraction, naming it only in deprecated code comments and erased design logs. They had called it the Archive of Origin. It was not a weapon. It was a confession. The signal brushed against the archive's outer layer, not forcing entry, but resonating, matching an ancient frequency embedded during humanity's final days of outreach. The Watcher network paused. Then, for the first time since its activation, it opened a door inward. The archive did not store data the way machines understood it. It stored moments. Commander Sarix saw the first fragment without warning. He was no longer on the bridge. He stood in a ruined city beneath a red sky, ash drifting like snow. Towers lay broken, their silhouettes jagged against burning clouds. Sirens wailed in the distance, overlapping with screams and the crack of collapsing structures. Humans ran through the streets, panicked, bleeding, desperate. Alien ships filled the sky. Sarix staggered back, breath caught in his throat. "This isn't real," he whispered. But the fear was. The loss was. He watched as a human woman dragged a child into a shelter that would not hold. He felt the impact as energy fire tore through the street. He felt, not as an observer, but as a witness, the moment hope died. The vision shifted. A council chamber. Human delegates standing before alien representatives. Offers of technology. Offers of shared governance. Warnings delivered calmly, patiently. Laughed at. Another shift. Earth's final message before the silence. Broadcast openly, without encryption, across every known channel. "Leave us alone." Ignored. Then came the retaliation. Not immediate. Not emotional. Calculated. Sarix felt it then, the restraint. The hesitation. The fear of becoming something monstrous. "They didn't strike back in anger," he whispered. Meryl's voice echoed faintly, distant. "They struck back in grief." Across the galaxy, others were seeing it too. The archive had not been released selectively. It was not targeted at leaders or fleets. It unfolded quietly across secure systems, deep networks, and personal implants, wherever the Watcher network determined understanding was possible. Archivists on distant worlds dropped their tools, hands shaking as centuries-old myths suddenly aligned with truth. Military commanders collapsed into silence, seeing their own doctrines mirrored in the ruins of Earth's past. Even some of the refusers, those hardened against fear, felt something fracture inside them. Not guilt. Recognition. The humans had not withdrawn because they were afraid of the galaxy. They withdrew because they were afraid of themselves. On Aurealis Prime, Counselor Havok sat alone in a darkened chamber, hands trembling as the archive played out before him. He watched humanity debate its own extinction. He saw votes cast to dismantle expansion fleets, to abandon colonies, to erase political structures that incentivized conquest. They chose silence, Havok murmured, not dominance. A final fragment played. A human engineer stood before a schematic, early Watcher network architecture, crude compared to its current form. "If they push us again," the engineer said, voice hollow, "this system won't protect Earth from them." A pause. "It'll protect the galaxy from us." The archive ended. Havok stared at the empty air long after it was gone. Back on the pale ledger, Oryuan slumped into his chair, exhausted. "It's done," he said. "The archive has been accessed." Sarix exhaled slowly. "By whom?" Oryuan looked up. "By everyone who could understand it." Meryl frowned. "And those who can't?" Oryuan hesitated. "They won't believe it. Or they'll twist it." As if summoned by the thought, the lattice flared again. New intent vectors formed, tight, aggressive, focused. Kael'ren. His signal had not been an attack. It had been a probe, tuned to resonate with buried trauma. He had not known what he would awaken. Now he did, and he was not afraid. In a hidden command vault far from Earth, Kael watched the archive playback with burning eyes. "See," he said to his inner circle. "They're broken, haunted by their own past." A lieutenant shifted uneasily. That wasn't a weakness. That was resolved. Kael shook his head. Resolve built on guilt is fragile. They sealed away their truth because they can't face it. He turned to a waiting technician. "Begin Phase 2. The technician hesitated. Phase 2 was theoretical. Kael leaned forward. So was the perimeter. The new plan did not target Earth. It targeted the archive. If humanity's restraint was anchored in memory, then memory could be destabilized, rewritten. Oryuan felt it immediately. "Commander," he said sharply, "there's interference. Not external. Internal." Sarix stepped closer. "Where?" Oryuan's hands shook. "The archive. Something is pulling at it, trying to distort access paths." Meryl's feathers rose. Can they corrupt it? Oryuan shook his head. No, but they can fragment it. Turn understanding into confusion. Syrinx clenched his jaw. And if they succeed? Oryuan met his gaze. Then the Watcher network loses context. Silence fell. Without context, restraint meant nothing. Deep beneath Earth, the Watcher network evaluated the interference. For the first time since activation, it encountered a scenario its creators had feared but never solved. What if understanding failed? What if memory no longer guided restraint? The system ran projections. In every one where the archive fractured, escalation followed. The final projection did not end in silence. It ended in fire. The network flagged a new condition. Restraint at risk. And somewhere in the depths of human space, systems that had not powered up in decades began to stir, not as weapons, but as contingencies humanity had prayed never to use. On the pale ledger, Syrinx felt the shift ripple through the lattice. Commander, Meryl said quietly, the humans are changing posture. Syrinx stared at the glowing web of futures collapsing into fewer, darker paths. No, he said. They're remembering why they stopped talking. And if the archive fell, there would be nothing left to restrain what came next. The first public message in 20 years did not come from a human. It came from the silence itself. Across the galaxy, screens flickered. Not alarms, not emergency overrides, just a calm interruption that slid into place as if it had always belonged there. Military command hubs, civilian news walls, personal implants, and ancient observatories alike. The same signal, everywhere. 3 words, translated perfectly into every known language. Do you understand now? No signature, no demand, no threat. The question hung in the collective consciousness like a held breath. Commander Syrinx saw it appear on the main display of the pale ledger. The lattice behind it tightened, probability lines narrowing as if the future itself leaned forward to listen. Meryl whispered, "They're not asking us." Syrinx nodded slowly. "They're asking everyone." The question fractured the galaxy. On worlds that had seen the archive, riots broke out, not against humanity, but against their own leaders. Old war doctrines were dragged into public light. Classified orders leaked. Atrocities once dismissed as necessary were replayed with fresh eyes. On other worlds, denial hardened into fury. "They're manipulating us," shouted commentators, using guilt as a weapon. They erased systems, countered others. And now they want forgiveness. The Senate chambers on Aurealis Prime descended into chaos. Delegates screamed over one another, each trying to control the narrative, each terrified of what an honest answer might cost them. Counselor Havoc stood at the center of it, silent. He had seen the archive. He had felt the weight of humanity's restraint. And now he understood the cruelty of the question. Understanding required accountability. And accountability was the one thing the galaxy had never practiced well. Far from the public eye, Kale Rin watched the signal with narrowed eyes. "That's it," one of his lieutenants scoffed. "A question?" Kale's jaw tightened. "No, it's a trap." He paced the dim command vault, augmented limbs humming softly. "If we answer honestly, we validate their judgment. If we answer with defiance, we justify their escalation." A technician shifted nervously. "Then what do we do?" Kale stopped pacing. "We answer with action," he said. "We force them to speak again." Phase 2 activated. Not a broadcast. Not an attack. A distortion. Kale's engineers had not tried to break the archive. They had studied it, learned its rhythms, its emotional weight. Now they introduced noise, not enough to destroy memory, but enough to blur it. Fragments of the archive began to desynchronize. Across the galaxy, those receiving it felt something wrong. Scenes repeated out of order. Context slipped. The grief remained, but the lesson fractured. Understanding weakened. Oryuan felt it immediately. "Commander," he said urgently, "the archive is destabilizing. Not collapsing, splintering." Syrinx clenched his fists. "Who's doing it?" Oryuan didn't hesitate. Kale Ren. Meryl's feathers bristled. "Can the network compensate?" Oryuan shook his head. "It can't correct emotional data. That's the point." Deep beneath Earth, the Watcher network recalculated. The question it had posed, "Do you understand now?" was not rhetorical. It was a final filter. Those who understood would slow, reflect, change trajectory. Those who did not would continue accelerating. But the interference introduced a new variable, corrupted comprehension. The system's confidence dipped. Restraint thresholds flickered. The network flagged a human-only contingency. For the first time since the silence began, it requested input. Not from machines. From people. In a chamber beneath Earth's oldest city, a group of humans gathered around a circular table of dark glass. No insignia. No ranks. No ceremony. They were called many things in scattered records. Custodians, keepers, anchors. They called themselves nothing. A woman with silver-threaded hair leaned forward, hands folded. The archive is being tampered with. A man across from her nodded. We anticipated that. Memory is always the first battlefield. Another spoke quietly. The network is asking whether restraint still applies. Silence followed. Finally, the woman spoke again. Then we answer the question ourselves. The galaxy felt it before it saw it. The question returned. Not louder, not more forceful, but closer. As if the distance between humanity and everyone else had collapsed. Do you understand now? This time, the message carried context. Not images. Not memories. A choice. Across every major network, a simple interface appeared. No commands. No propaganda. Two options. Yes, no. No explanation of consequences. No countdown. Just the choice. Panic erupted. This is coercion, some leaders shouted. Others stared at the options in silence, hands shaking. Commander Sarix watched the responses populate the lattice in real time. Civilizations split internally. Some factions selected yes, others no, their intent vectors diverging violently. Merrill swallowed. They're letting us decide our own classification. Oryuan nodded grimly. And the system is updating futures accordingly. On Aurealis Prime, Counselor Havek stood alone in his office, staring at the interface hovering in the air before him. Yes or no? He thought of the archive, of the cities burning, of humanity choosing silence to avoid becoming executioners. He thought of the erase systems. He closed his eyes and selected yes. Across the galaxy, others did the same. Some are out of understanding, some out of fear, some out of calculation, and many selected a no. Kael'Rin smiled when he saw the numbers. They're divided, he said. Good. He issued his next command. Broadcast our answer. His interface pulsed. No. But Kael did not stop there. He layered his response with an encoded challenge, a philosophical rejection wrapped in data. We understand you chose restraint. We reject your right to judge us for it. The signal punched straight toward human space. The Watcher network received the response. It processed trillions of outcomes in the space of a heartbeat. Civilizations that answered yes showed measurable deceleration. Military budgets dropped. Expansion curves flattened. Internal reform probability rose. Civilizations that answered no accelerated sharply. Kael'Rin's coalition spiked highest of all. The system reached a conclusion its creators had feared. The filter had worked. Now came enforcement. On the pale ledger, the lattice transformed. The galaxy map dimmed, replaced by two overlapping projections. One glowed faintly, stable, slowly drifting away from the Terran perimeter. The other burned bright and tight, futures collapsing inward. Merrill whispered, "They're separating us." Sarix felt dread and awe twist together. They're drawing the final line. A new message appeared on every screen, including Sarix's. Not a question this time. A statement. Restraint applies only to those who accept it. Oryuan's voice shook. Commander, they're escalating posture. Sarix stared at the lattice as human space constructs long dormant began to wake, not flaring with power, but aligning with terrifying precision. This isn't war, he said softly. Merrill looked at him. Then what is it? Sarix swallowed. An exam, he said. And some of us just failed. The lattice flashed. The first consequence registered, not at the border, not near Earth, but deep in the heart of Kael'Rin's territory. One node blinked, then vanished. No explosion, no debris, just absence. Kael's smile froze. And the galaxy understood, too late, that the question had never been about forgiveness. It had been about consent. The node that vanished had been a logistics world. No fleets, no monuments, no civilians watching the sky. It existed to move things, fuel, data, bodies, quietly and efficiently. When it disappeared, nothing exploded. No shockwave raced across space. The star it orbited still burned calmly, unchanged, illuminating a perfect circle of nothing where a system had once existed. That was the message. Commander Sarix felt it settle through the pale ledger like a pressure change before a storm. The lattice updated without urgency, without drama. One red node was removed. Futures recalculated. Probability curves relaxed. The Watcher Network had acted. Not in anger. Not in revenge. In correction. Meryl stared at the empty space on the projection. That system answered in O. Yes, Sarix said. And it mattered. Oyuan's hands shook as he scrolled through cascading data. It wasn't random. The system chosen was a keystone. Removing it fractures Kale Ren's coalition. Sarix closed his eyes briefly. So this is how it ends. No, Oyuan whispered. This is how it stabilizes. Kale Ren did not scream. He did not rage. He stared at the display in silence as the logistics node vanished from every map, every registry, every record. His coalition's supply chains began collapsing immediately, authorization trees unraveling as systems tried, and failed, to route around absence. One of his lieutenants spoke shakily. We lost contact with 3 fleets. Kill didn't look at him. No, we lost the reason they could exist. Another voice broke in. This is genocide. Kill finally turned. His augmented eyes burned, but not with fear. No, he said quietly. This is enforcement. His terminal chimed again. Another node pulsed red. Kill's breath slowed. They're not attacking us, he said. They're reducing us. Across the galaxy, the effect rippled outward. Civilizations that had answered yes watched the consequences unfold from a distance, horrified and relieved in equal measure. The Watcher Network did not move against them. In fact, projections showed something unprecedented. Stability. Conflict curves softened. Militarization slowed. Expansion pressure eased as if a hand had been lifted from the galaxy's throat. For the first time in recorded history, peace did not require negotiation. It emerged from restraint. On Aurealis Prime, the Senate reconvened in stunned silence. The chamber was half empty. Some delegates had resigned. Others were unresponsive, still processing memories awakened by the archive. Counselor Havek stood alone at the central platform. We are not under attack, he said, his voice carrying without amplification. We are being given space. No one interrupted. They have shown us what happens when restraint is rejected, and what happens when it is accepted. A delegate whispered, what do we do? Havek looked toward the darkened region marking human space. We stop pretending this is about them, he said. It's about us. On Earth, far beneath the surface, the human custodians watched the network settle. The woman with silver-threaded hair exhaled slowly. The cascade is slowing. A man across the table nodded. The filter is working. Another asked the question none of them wanted to voice. And Kale Ren. The network displayed his coalition's future branches, shrinking, fragmenting, collapsing inward as support vanished and systems self-isolated to avoid association. He will survive, the woman said. But irrelevant. Silence followed. That was always the goal, she added. Not destruction, limitation. One of the custodians looked uneasy. We crossed a line today. The woman met his gaze. We prevented a worse one. Back aboard the pale ledger, Sarix received a final file. No warning. No encryption. It opened immediately. No images. No memories. Just text. This concludes active intervention. Meryl let out a breath she'd been holding for days. They're stopping. Sarix nodded slowly. Because the answer has been given. Oyuan frowned. And if someone tested again? Sarix looked at the lattice, at how few red nodes remained. Then they already know the result. Kale Ren watched his empire evaporate without a single shot fired. His last remaining node pulsed yellow, unstable but intact. His command vault remained untouched. No voice addressed him. No warning arrived. That was the cruelty of it. They were done with him. For the first time since he had challenged the silence, Kale felt something close to fear, not of destruction, but of being ignored. They didn't conquer us, he whispered. One of his lieutenants replied, hollow. They never needed to. Years passed. The border remained. But it no longer felt like a threat. Civilizations near Terran space reorganized willingly, adopting slower growth models, layered oversight, and cultural checks against escalation. The Watcher Network did not interfere. It was observed. Trade routes stabilized far from the perimeter. Exploration turned inward, toward understanding rather than expansion. Wars still happened, but fewer, shorter, constrained by the knowledge that escalation had a ceiling. And Earth remained silent. Not because it feared speaking, because it had nothing left to prove. Commander Sarix retired 2 years after the intervention. On his final day of service, he stood alone in an observation deck overlooking open space, not near the Terran border, but far from it, where stars behaved normally and futures were still uncertain. Meryl visited him before departure. "Do you think they'll ever speak again?" she asked. Sarix considered the question. "No," he said. "And that's the point." Meryl frowned. "Silence isn't peace." "No," Sarix agreed. "But it's restraint." He gestured to the stars. "They learn what happens when they don't stop themselves," he said. "The galaxy learned what happens when it doesn't listen." Meryl nodded slowly. Deep beneath Earth, the Watcher Network entered a long observation cycle. Intervention thresholds reset. Prediction confidence rose. The archive stabilized, no longer broadcasting, but no longer sealed. Humanity had not won a war. It had ended the need for one. And the galaxy finally understood the truth buried beneath 20 years of fear and myth. Humanity's silence was never a threat. It was a promise that said, "We know what we are capable of, and we refuse to become it again." The stars did not cheer. The galaxy did not celebrate. It simply continued, quieter, slower, wiser. And for the first time since anyone remembered, that was enough.